Martha Stewart reported to a federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia, on the 8th of October, 2004. Over the 5 months she spent there, shares of her own company went up. The people who owned those shares had already watched Martha Stewart. Living Omnimedia fall from $1.8 billion on its first day of trading to somewhere near $437 million. Now their founder was inside a federal facility, working a job that paid 12 cents an hour, and the stock was climbing without her. Almost none of what they had lost was ever coming back. New York, the 19th of October, 1999. Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia opened on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange at $18 a share. By the closing bell, the shares were trading near 38. On paper, Martha Stewart had become the first self-made female billionaire in the United States, and she had done it selling instructions on how to fold napkins and grow peonies. 3 months before that, the venture firm Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers had paid $25 million for 5% of the business. The offering itself raised roughly $132 million in net proceeds. Kmart carried her housewares. The magazine sat on every supermarket rack in the country, and the television show ran in syndication. Every division of that company sold the same underlying product wearing different packaging, and the product was her name. By 2001, the business was posting annual sales of $295 million and profits close to $22 million. Martha Stewart held her controlling stake through a class of super voting shares, which meant that no board and no outside investor could remove her. The arrangement was written into the corporate charter and disclosed in the filings. Investors bought in anyway, because it worked. There was a problem sitting underneath all of it, and it had nothing to do with anything Martha Stewart ever did. Kmart was the retail partner. The Martha Stewart everyday line, everything from bed sheets to dinnerware, ran through KR. Stores. And in January of 2002, Kmart filed for bankruptcy protection. That left the most profitable segment inside Martha Stewart. Living Omnimedia bolted to a company in Chapter 11. Cody would buy into the same arrangement with Kylie Jenner 2 decades later, and it would end the same way. All of this happened before any of the events people actually remember, and the stock barely moved on the news, because nobody was watching the merchandising segment. They were watching. The 27th of December, 2001. Martha Stewart was on a private plane, flying to Mexico for the holidays. She held 3,928 shares of a biotechnology company called ImClone Systems. ImClone had one asset that mattered, a cancer drug called Erbitux, and it was waiting on the Food and Drug Administration to accept its application for review. Her broker at Merrill Lynch, Peter Bakanovich, was on vacation in Florida. His assistant, a 26-year-old named Douglas Fanuel, was covering the desk. That morning, Fanuel watched Samuel Waxall, the founder and chief executive of ImClone, try to dump every share he owned. Merrill Lynch blocked Waxall's own sale. His daughter Eliza got hers through. Bakanovich, calling in from Florida, told Fanuel to pass that information to Martha Stewart. She rang from the plane. Fanuel told her what the Waxalls were doing. She sold all 3,928 shares that afternoon for about $228,000. The next evening, after the market closed, the Food and Drug Administration announced it had refused to even file ImClone's application for Erbitux. By the end of the following trading day, the stock had dropped about 16% to $46 a share. By selling 1 day early, Martha Stewart avoided a loss of $45,673. That figure is not an estimate. We can be precise about it, because the commission was. It appears, to the dollar, in the complaint later filed against her. $45,673. At the time, her stake in her own company was worth close to $1 billion. What she saved on the ImClone trade came to less than 1/100% of her net worth. She would not have noticed it missing. When the Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation came asking about the sale in early 2002, Martha Stewart and Peter Bakanovich gave them the same answer. They said there had been a standing arrangement in place, a stop-loss order, an instruction to sell the ImClone shares automatically if the price ever fell below $60. There was no such arrangement. Douglas Fanuel, the assistant who had placed the call, told investigators the truth. He testified that no $60 agreement existed and that Bakanovich had instructed him to tip her off. Fanuel pleaded to a misdemeanor and paid a fine of $2,000. No prison. He lost his job in finance and spent a stretch working in a Chelsea art gallery. Years later, he surfaced as chief of staff for technology and products at Gawker Media. Of everyone in this story, he is the one who told investigators what happened the first time they asked. And he is the one nobody remembers. By the 21st of August, 2002, before any indictment existed, the shares had fallen to $8.91. The following day, a shareholder named Howard Rosen sued her. On the 4th of June, 2003, a federal grand jury in Manhattan indicted Martha Stewart on 9 counts. The Securities and Exchange Commission filed its separate civil complaint the same day. She resigned as chairman and chief executive of Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia within hours, though she stayed on the board. The day after that, she took out a full-page advertisement in USA Today and published an open letter on a website her lawyers had built, addressed to her friends and loyal supporters. In it, she said she was innocent, and that the government's attempt to criminalize her actions made no sense to her. Then came the trial, and the part of this story that almost nobody has right. Martha Stewart was never convicted of insider trading. The government charged her with securities fraud, arguing that her public declarations of innocence were themselves an illegal act, a scheme to prop up the price of her own company's stock. Before the case reached the jury, the presiding judge, Miriam Sederbaum, threw that count out. She ruled that no reasonable juror could find beyond a reasonable doubt that Martha Stewart had proclaimed her innocence in order to manipulate the market in her own shares. What remained were 3 counts, and not one of them concerned the trade itself. The jury was asked whether she had conspired with her broker, whether she had obstructed a federal agency proceeding, and whether she had lied to investigators. In March of 2004, it answered yes to all 3. She did not go to prison for selling ImClone stock. The conviction was for the story she told afterward. There is an episode in the middle of all this that almost never gets told, and it does not fit anywhere neatly, which is probably why. One of the government's expert witnesses was a Secret Service laboratory director named Larry Stewart, no relation to her. He testified about the ink on Peter Bakanovich's worksheet, the document that supposedly recorded the $60 agreement. 2 months after the guilty verdict, Larry Stewart was himself charged with perjury after a colleague complained that she had done the analysis and that he had never examined the samples at all. Shares of Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia jumped on the news. A jury acquitted him that October. For a few weeks, it looked as though the verdict might come apart on the credibility of a government ink analyst. It did not. The Second Circuit affirmed both convictions in January of 2006. Samuel Waxall, meanwhile, the man who actually held the inside information, pleaded guilty to securities fraud, bank fraud, obstruction of justice, and perjury. Judge William Pauley sentenced him to 87 months and told him the harm he had caused was truly incalculable. Waxall also admitted to dodging $1.2 million in sales tax on $15 million worth of art. If you are following this and you want more of it, subscribe. We publish a new financial investigation every week, and the documents are always on screen. Now we come to the part of the record that is filed publicly, that anyone can read, and that nobody has read. While the case was running, the company was dying. Advertising pages in the magazine fell by roughly 31% through September of 2003. Single copy sales dropped about 18% over the first half of that year. In October, the company cut its guaranteed circulation, the number it promises advertisers it will deliver, by 22%. Unilever, which had spent $4.8 million advertising with Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia in 2002, spent $130,000 in 2003. Then there is the filing itself. On the 3rd of August, 2004, 3 weeks after the sentencing, Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia submitted a Form 8K to the Securities and Exchange Commission, reporting its second quarter results. Revenue for the quarter came in at $44 million, against $65.8 million in the same quarter a year before. The operating line moved from a profit of $1.5 million to a loss of $19.3 million. Inside that filing, the company's chief executive, Sharon Patrick, explains why. She writes that the results reflect losses due to the negative effects of Martha Stewart's personal legal situation, primarily on the company's advertising performance. Sharon Patrick had taken the chief executive role when Martha Stewart resigned. She was not writing a press release. A Form 8K is a mandatory disclosure to a federal regulator, drafted by lawyers on the assumption that it will one day be read aloud in a courtroom. In it, a publicly traded corporation formally names its own founder as the cause of its collapse. That document has been sitting on the commission's servers for more than 20 years. The company held $158 million in cash and carried no debt. It would spend the next decade burning through both. And there is one more line in the record, from the annual report filed the following March, that changes the shape of this story. Martha Stewart asked the company to pay her legal bills. Under Delaware law, and under the company's own charter, an officer or director sued for actions taken in that capacity is generally entitled to have their defense costs covered. This is as ordinary corporate practice, and it exists so that competent people will serve on boards without risking personal ruin. The securities fraud count against her, the one Judge Cedarbaum dismissed, concerned statements she had made as chief executive. That made it, in the company's reading, an indemnifiable claim. An independent expert reviewed the request and concluded she was entitled to $3.7 million. The company stated in that annual report that the payment would not result in an expense to the corporation because the amount was covered by directors' and officers' liability insurance. There was no requirement that she repay any of it. She filed the request in November of 2004, 1 month after reporting to Alderson. Read that against the number at the center of the case. She avoided a loss of $45,673, defending the charges that arose from that sale cost, by one accounting $3.7 million, and she paid for none of it out of her own pocket. On the 16th of July, 2004, Judge Cedarbaum sentenced her to 5 months in prison, 5 months of home confinement, 2 years of supervised release, and a fine of $30,000. The fine was smaller than the money she saved on the trade. She served her time at Alderson. Federal prison camp jobs there paid between 12 cents and 40 cents an hour. Martha Stewart said afterward that it would have taken 600 hours of work to buy a pair of boots from the commissary. She was released on the 4th of March, 2005. The stock, as we said at the beginning, went up while she was inside. Investors had priced in the worst and found the worst survivable. It never came close to what it had been. In August of 2006, she settled the commission's civil case without admitting or denying anything. She handed back the $45,673 she had avoided losing. On top of that came $12,389 in prejudgment interest and a civil penalty of $137,019, roughly $195,000 in all, plus a 5-year bar from serving as a director of any public company. The shareholders got something as well. A securities class action, brought on behalf of everyone who bought the stock during 2002, settled for $30 million. $15 million came from the company. $10 million came from its insurers. $5 million came from Martha Stewart personally. A federal judge approved the settlement in June of 2007. $30 million, distributed across a class of investors who had watched more than $1 billion evaporate. Whitney Houston earned $250 million over her career and died with $40,000, which is a different mechanism arriving at the same arithmetic. That account is on this channel too. She came back to the company. In 2008, Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia signed an agreement to pay $2 million a year to a private company she owned in exchange for the perpetual right to use what the filing calls her lifestyle intangible asset and for access to her homes for filming. By 2011, her compensation from the public company ran to $5.5 million for the year, including $73,000 for a weekend driver. Over that same stretch, Martha Stewart Living Omnimedia lost money in every single year from 2003 through 2014, with one exception, 2007. 11 losing years out of 12. In 2012 alone, the company reported a net loss of $56 million. In 2015, Sequential Brands bought the company for $6.15 a share, roughly $353 million. Martha Stewart held just over 27 million shares between the two classes. Her stake came to about $166 million, and she took the same price per share as every minority holder. Sequential then wrote off $304 million of goodwill. The Securities and Exchange Commission sued the company in December of 2020 for having delayed that write-down, calculating that its reported net loss for 2016 should have been 54 times larger than the figure it published. Sequential sold the Martha Stewart brand to Marquee Brands in 2019 for about $175 million, half of what it had paid 4 years earlier. In August of 2021, Sequential Brands filed for bankruptcy. Every buyer in the chain paid less than the buyer before them. Everything in this account comes from filings that are public. The pension fund that put $405 million into Taylor Swift's catalog left the same kind of paper trail, and that video is on screen now, which leaves the drug. Erbitux, the cancer treatment whose rejection set all of this in motion, was resubmitted with new clinical data by ImClone's German partner. The Food and Drug Administration approved it in February of 2004 for colorectal cancer, 1 month before Martha Stewart's conviction. ImClone stock recovered and kept going. In October of 2008, Eli Lilly acquired ImClone Systems for $70 a share in cash, a transaction valued at roughly $6.5 billion. Martha Stewart sold 3,928 shares of ImClone for about $228,000. At $70 a share, those same 3,928 shares would have been worth $270,960. She lied to federal investigators, lost her company, and served 5 months in a federal prison camp in order to avoid a loss of $45,673 on a stock that would have made her money if she had done absolutely nothing. She has never accepted the verdict. Asked about it, she still says she was innocent, and when a documentary about her life was released, she called it lousy